someone who has deeply hurt or deeply harmed us? How do we let go of a desire for revenge, punishment, or retribution when someone has completely changed the trajectory of our lives? How do we forgive the person who has publicly embarrassed us to the point of calling our character and our reputation into question? Those were the questions Joseph of Bethlehem had to ask himself in Matthew's first chapter. Joseph was betrothed to Mary, and betrothal in first century Israel was the time after a father had arranged a marriage for his daughter, and after the groom and his family had paid the bridal price. The woman who was betrothed was part of a legal contract. Even so, she lived at home with her family of origin until the actual wedding took place. Now, Joseph discovered that Mary was expecting a baby, and he was very confident that he was not the father. Discovering that his legally betrothed wife was expecting another man's baby was a point of great embarrassment for Joseph. As soon as the others learned of Mary's betrayal, the others in the community learned of her betrayal, Joseph's reputation would definitely be harmed. The community would believe that he was not capable of controlling his wife, in those days, his property. Yeah, I know. Now, Joseph had the right to seek revenge against Mary and the man who had fathered the child. Joseph had every right to embarrass Mary and the man with nasty names, a lawsuit, and ultimately stoning by the community. Without question, his feelings were hurt. His reputation was harmed. His character was going to be called into question. And because of all that, most people expected Joseph to punish, embarrass, and humiliate Mary and that other man, but Mary for her wayward behavior as a way of getting revenge and saving face for himself. If he sought revenge, he could show that he was the dominant macho man of that patriarchal culture. What is it that we want when our reputation has been harmed? What do we want when our feelings and our hearts have been broken? What do we want when somebody willingly and wantonly breaks a contract? What do we want to do when everything we hoped for, everything we planned for, everything we prepared for and worked for is ruined by someone we thought we could trust? Well, at the least, most of us will ghost the other person. And ghosting is when we simply disappear out of their lives. We don't respond to texts, if you text. We don't respond to emails. We don't respond to calls. We don't show up where they usually show up. We simply disappear from their lives. It's called ghosting. And ghosting really is the least we can do. Legally, the most we can do is file a lawsuit bringing charges of libel, breach of contract, or anything else the law will allow. And in between the least we can do and the most we can do legally, many of us are tempted to hurt back, to harm the other's reputation, to disparage their character, to hurt their feelings. Because after all, we've been hurt, we've been harmed, and we want the one who harmed us and hurt us to feel some pain as well. We want the other to feel as bad or preferably worse than we do. But as we've discovered, when we hit back, when we've retaliated, when we've taken revenge, it doesn't work very well. Any kind of retaliation may feel good in the moment, but in the long term, we're still left with those feelings of hurt and harm, embarrassment, shame, anger, all of those other feelings that begin to take a toll on our souls. We can try to hit back, but that feeling of joy in that moment only lasts so long. And then we are left with every other feeling that led us to take that drastic action. Now, we know how the story of Joseph and Mary ended. We know the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and helped him understand that he and Mary had been chosen by God to raise the new Messiah. And while Joseph knew what was expected of him, it's highly likely he still had a lot of feelings to deal with. Mary and Joseph were wed shortly after the angel appeared, but let's face it, even in the first century, people could count to 9. Even in the first century, people would have known that a quiet wedding between Joseph and Mary meant Mary did not always spend the night at her father's house. Even in the first century, people enjoyed juicy gossip. Even in the first century, people enjoyed a bit of gossip that kind of smeared somebody else's reputation. As long as it wasn't yours, it was fair game. But here's the thing, even before the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream to assure him that Mary had been faithful to him, Joseph had already come to a decision. Rather than embarrass Mary and the other man involved, rather than expose her to gossip, mockery, or threat of stoning, Joseph decided to quietly divorce her without any attempts at embarrassment, lawsuits, punishment, or even revenge. And we might think that Joseph came to that decision so that none of those feelings would blow back on him, that he could avoid the embarrassment, that he could avoid. The quieter he kept it, the less came back to him. But Matthew's gospel gave us a different reason for Joseph's decision. Matthew wrote that Joseph came to his decision because he was a righteous man. He was a man of faith. He was a man who knew that God had forgiven him multiple times, forgiven him over and over and over again. And Joseph was a man that knew the only way he could be free from harm or hurt in his life was by forgiving Mary. So Joseph chose to be kind. Now, we are up to our necks in the holiday season, are we not? If you don't believe it, just look around. We are up to our necks in the holiday season. And let's face it, we just spent time with family just 4 short weeks ago, right? And we get to do it again. We just spent time with friends just 4 short weeks ago, and guess what? We get to do it some more. Geez, what? We just went to the grocery store and the stores just a few weeks ago, and guess what? We get to do it some more. And when people get tired, which I suspect most of us are, I'm sorry, I won't wander much further. When people get tired, when people eat too much, you know that feeling of just being the Kool-Aid man, just because we've eaten so much? When we've had just a little bit too much company and not much time for ourselves, and we've had just a wee bit too much alcohol, things get said, and things get done. And feelings that we thought were long since buried tend to come up and wreak havoc in the midst of a family gathering. Feelings that we thought were long gone can come back to us in the midst of all the excitement, and we suddenly find ourselves maybe not taking it out on the family, because after all we got to see them again, but on people we meet in the stores, or on the road, or at church. And we find ourselves driving down the road, and suddenly somebody gives us the universal gesture of displeasure. And we feel the need to do something to get back at them, so we rev up and tailgate them all the way down the road. I saw that just yesterday. Somebody who clearly is not from here was tailgating the person in front because they weren't going fast enough. And the more the person sped up, the more they went right behind them. And I was just waiting for the accident, getting the license plate number, you know, ready to be a witness. Fortunately, the person in front decided to turn. You know how it is in this community where we walk out into those crossed patterns in front of Walmart or in front of the grocery store and people actually stop? Oh, not yesterday. You are taking your life in your hands. Because it was the holidays. You step out and you go, vroom! We are in a place in our lives where a little bit of grief, too much food, credit cards that we have completely maxed out, family we're seeing again, with food we may not like, presents that have maxed out our credit cards, noisy, active children who are running around, making noise, and then get bored and make some more noise. All of those things can get to us, and we can decide to let it. Or we can take a deep breath and be kind. We can take a deep breath and say, you know what? Been there, done that. You know what? I was one of those kids at one time. Mom would play galloping music on the piano so we could all gallop around the middle of the house to try to get some of it out. We've all been there. We've all done that. Somebody can say a harsh word to us that we just didn't take very well. And we can decide to say a harsh word back. Or we can say, you know what? Inside of ourselves, I get it. We're all stressed. We can just say, yeah, that's all right. And then treat the other person with kindness. We can choose to make this season uncomfortable. We can choose to make this season one full of contention. I can get it out. Full of contention. We can choose to make this season one where we drive down the road mad at everything and everybody. Or we can take a page from Joseph's book and be kind. Why? Because God has been so utterly kind to us. Because all of the times that we have offended God, God has said, I forgive you. All of the times when we've had a harsh word for God, and some of us have had harsh words for God, God has said, I get it. You're tired, you're hurt, you're stressed. I forgive you. All of those times we have been the one who struck out and harmed someone who chose not to harm us back. God said, I get it. We can choose to be kind because of how so completely, utterly kind God is to us. Now, Joseph could have been a jerk. He could have been a complete and total jerk. But he wasn't. Because he was a man of faith. Even before he knew what the final outcome was going to be, he decided to be kind. Maybe we can be too. When somebody at the dinner table says something political that with every fiber of our being we do not agree with, we can remember that as patriots it's our job to protect with our lives their right to say what they believe in their freedom of speech. When we're at the dinner table and somebody says something that raises up an old feeling, we can lash back or we can say, you know what? It's been a long season. Your family. You're kind of weird and I don't really understand you and sometimes you're kind of a jerk, but we can choose to be kind. Perhaps that can be our goal, is to follow Joseph and be kind. Amen.